Hello, welcome to the notes on endosymbiosis. We are talking about how cells live closely together with other cells. And so if we look at the word endo and symbiosis, if we break that down, we can see that symbiosis, it refers to a relationship where two things live closely with one another. And endo means that one thing is living inside the other, on or inside. And so we're looking at a relationship, a close relationship, where one thing is living inside the other thing, and they are benefiting because of this. So let's get started. So in this video, let me start this. We can see an endosymbiotic relationship happening. This organism here is a Paramecium bursaria, and in it you can see little green dots. Those little green dots are a type of algae called chlorella. And so there is algae, one type of organism, living inside the other organism. And so why would one organism live inside the other? Well, that's because they both benefit from this relationship. The algae has a safe place to live, and it photosynthesizes. So it's going to give the energy that it gets from the sun to the paramecium so that they both benefit. And so this is an endosymbiotic relationship that we see today. And so there are two historical famous endosymbiotic relationships that we're going to talk about today that has changed life on Earth dramatically. So all of life began, we suspect, about 3.5 billion years ago. And at that time, it was non-complex. It was simple. It was single-celled organisms living in the ocean. They were all prokaryotic cells living in the ocean. And so somewhere along the way, we hypothesized that there was, about 2.5 billion years ago, that there was a larger cell that engulfed a smaller cell. So here's our smaller cell being engulfed. And then here it is existing inside the cell. And we suspect that the smaller cell was able to give the bigger cell energy, like little volts of energy, little volts of lightning sort of within the cell. And so that energy helped the cell to be stronger and faster so that it could outcompete other cells, it could get more food, and it could reproduce more often. And so it was more successful because of the extra energy that it had. And so therefore it didn't digest the other cell. So usually one cell would engulf another cell and digest it and use it for its pieces. But this cell was helping it out, and so we suspect that it didn't digest it. So this seems like it's far-fetched. Why do we think that? Well, we suspect over time that the smaller cell became the mitochondria. So here we have the smaller cell, it being engulfed by a bigger cell. And then here's today's eukaryotic or complex cell. And we can see that there are these mitochondria all around inside of it. And so why do we think that this mitochondria was at one point its own living organism? Well, because the mitochondria has its own set of DNA, separate from the cell's DNA that occurs in the nucleus. Not only does it have its own DNA, it has its own schedule. It's going to reproduce at its own schedule. So when the large cell, when the eukaryotic cell is reproducing, that's not necessarily when the mitochondria are reproducing. They go at their own pace. Sort of like a similar to its own organism. Also, because it has the same size and same shape as a bacteria cell. So I don't know if you can see this on the video, but this is the shape of the bacteria. And if we look at the mitochondria inside the cell, they have about the same shape and the same size. And so we suspect that these mitochondria were ancient cells that existed independently of the host cell. So this was the primary endosymbiosis event. So primary, we can assume by looking at the word primary that this was the first endosymbiotic event. So here, let's look at our secondary endosymbiotic event. We suspect that one of these cells that already had a mitochondria and had a nucleus over time became more complex. And one day they engulfed a cyanobacteria. A cyanobacteria is a bacteria that can photosynthesize. So the host cell could not photosynthesize, which means obtain energy from the sun and use it to fuel itself, an autotroph, whereas the host cell was a heterotroph. It had to consume its food. And so we suspect that the large heterotrophic cell engulfed the small autotrophic cell, or the big cell engulfed the little cell that could go through photosynthesis. And we suspect that, once again, because it provided a benefit, it gave energy to the cell because it could get energy from the sun and give it to the larger cell, we suspect it didn't digest it. And over time, we suspect that this became our current day organelle called the chloroplast. So cells that have chloroplasts, we call, are plant cells, and plants can photosynthesize. These are the only two types of species on Earth that can photosynthesize. And so we suspect that they were related. So the evidence for our secondary endosymbiotic event, one is that chloroplasts, once again, have their own set of DNA. And therefore, they also reproduce on their own schedule, just like mitochondria. Chloroplasts and cyanobacteria are similar in shape and size, and photosynthesis occurs only in cyanobacteria and chloroplasts. And so we suspect that the chloroplasts were once ancient, independently living cyanobacteria. We do still have cyanobacteria filling the oceans and living all over the earth, but we also now have chloroplasts, and they both can photosynthesize, which is a pretty amazing process. And so why is this important? Well, endosymbiosis, or the endosymbiont theory, explains, it's one path that explains how, one, life became more complex over time. So life started out simple, meaning it had fewer pieces. And over time, it becomes more complex. It has more pieces. It can do more things. And so it started off as a prokaryotic cell. Life was simply prokaryotic cells bouncing around in the ocean. But then it became cells that had complexity, that had organelles and could photosynthesize and could also be heterotrophic or could consume things. So this is one way that we understand that life became more complex. However, it also explains how life can become more diverse. So we started out with just bacteria in the ocean, and now we have millions of species on Earth that we categorize in our three domains: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. And if you remember, eukarya is our most complex, our most pieces. So we have multicellular organisms in eukarya, but only single-celled organisms in bacteria. So bacteria, or prokarya, are made of prokaryotic cells, and they are simple. And over time, life has become more complex and exists in this domain that we call eukarya. All right, I hope this helps and this makes sense. Have a great day.